The wind off the Vethar cliffs had teeth that night, and Melis felt every one of them as she climbed the spiral stair toward the king's solar. 312 steps. She had counted them every time she ascended, in the year and a half since Koran first pressed her against the carved obsidian wall of the eastern landing and whispered that he had been searching for her face since before he knew faces existed. She counted them now, in the heart of the deepest winter Drevhallen had seen in a generation, because counting was the only thing keeping her from running back down. She pressed her gloved hand to her belly beneath her cloak. 11 weeks, maybe 12. The tea leaf reader in the lower market had not even needed to read the leaves. "You carry more than one," the old woman had said. "Your shadow has 3 heads, child. Tell their father to brace himself." Melis had walked home through the snow without feeling her feet. Tonight, she would tell him tonight. Koran had sent for her with a sealed parchment delivered by a guard she had never seen before, and though the guard's face had been carefully blank, she had told herself it was only because formal summons demanded formality. The Alpha King could not send a love letter through official channels. That was what their stolen mornings were for, the 1,000 small rooms of the castle where they had learned each other by candlelight. She reached the top of the stair. The 2 wolves who flanked the solar door did not bow. They did not even look at her. That was the first wrongness. The second was the silence on the other side of the wood. The solar always hummed. Corin paced when he thought, and his pacing made the floorboards sing. Tonight, behind that door, there was nothing. A held breath, a pulled bow. The left guard pushed the door open without a word. Melis stepped inside. The long oak table that had always been pushed against the southern window stood now in the center of the room, and around it sat 7 figures in council robes, their faces turned toward her with the patient attention of judges. The Hand of the Realm, the High Reader of the Bone Books, the 2 speakers for the outer packs, the Treasurer, the Master of the Hunt. And at the far end, in the chair carved with the running stag of his line, Koran. He did not stand when she entered. He did not look at her. He was looking at his own folded hands, and his hands were steady in the way a frozen lake is steady, too still, hiding a current beneath. "Melis of the Hollow Reach," said the Hand of the Realm, and her name in his mouth was a thing she did not recognize. He had called her Melis before, simply, when she had brought tea to council meetings as a steward's apprentice. Tonight he was using the full weight of her birthplace like a stone he was preparing to drop. "You will hear what is said in this room, and you will not speak until invited." She felt the cold from the floor begin to climb her legs. "My king," she said, because her training would not let her stay silent. "If there has been—" "You will not speak," the hand repeated, "until invited." Melis closed her mouth. She looked at Corin. "Look at me." He did not. The hand rose. He walked around the table with the careful tread of someone who had performed this ceremony before, and Melis understood that this was a ceremony, that what about to happen had been written down somewhere, and copies had been made. "It has come to the council's attention," he began, in the cadence of formal recitation, "that an unsanctioned attachment has formed between His Majesty Koran of the Vethar line and a woman of common birth, namely yourself. This attachment has begun to compromise matters of state. The outer packs grow restless. The treaty with the Sable Reach has stalled. The succession of the Vethar line has been placed in jeopardy." Melis's hand pressed harder against her belly without her knowing it. "His Majesty has accepted that the situation cannot continue. You will be released from your position. You will receive 200 silver from the treasurer, sufficient to begin a new life beyond the Greythorn River. You will not return to the capital. You will not seek audience with His Majesty by any means. You will speak of what passed between you to no one, on pain of penalties to be determined by this council." The hand paused. "His Majesty will speak now." He sat. Coran raised his head. She had spent a year and a half memorizing his face, and she did not know the face she saw now. His eyes, the riverstone eyes that had wept against her shoulder the night his mother died, were flat. The muscle in his jaw worked once. His mouth opened. "You are to leave by sunrise," he said. His voice was perfectly level. "You were a useful diversion. You are no longer useful. You will not contact me. You will not write. If you do, I will know, and I will not be merciful." A pause. "You are nothing to me, Milas. You always were." The room blurred. She did not cry. Some part of her, some old, stubborn peasant part that had survived 3 brothers dying in one winter, and a father who never came back from the Sable War, stood up inside her chest and locked every door. Her face went still. Her hands went still. The hand on her belly went still. "Yes, my king," she said. She did not curtsy. She turned. She walked to the door. She took the 312 steps down the spiral stair the way she had taken them up, counting. And at the bottom she walked across the courtyard and into the small room beneath the eaves where she had slept for nearly 2 years. And she packed her mother's bone comb, the blue dress she had been wearing the night Corin first told her he loved her, the vial of pine resin oil she used for her hands when they cracked from laundry work, the folded square of linen that had been her father's last letter. She did not pack the silver brooch he had given her on her name day. She laid it on the pillow, and she placed both hands flat on the cold stone of the windowsill, and she spoke to her stomach for the first time as if it were a person. "You will not know him," she whispered. "You will not know his name. He will never know you exist. As far as the world is concerned, you have only me, and I have only you, and that will be enough." She kissed her fingers and pressed them to her belly. Then she pulled her cloak tight, took the servants' passage beneath the stables, and walked out into the storm. She did not look back. She did not see 3 turns of the spiral stair above the chamber she had been dismissed from, in the small private oratory where the Vathar kings had prayed for 9 generations. Corin dropped to both knees on the stone floor. She did not see the sound that came out of him when he finally let it come. A sound so raw that the wolf in the kennels beneath the keep lifted his head and answered, until every wolf within a league of the castle had joined him. She did not see the hand of the realm enter that oratory and place a hand on Coran's shoulder and say very quietly, "It is done. It is. The threat to her life is contained. She is safe now, sire." She did not see Coran lift a sealed letter from inside his tunic, a letter he had written that morning, beginning, "My only one. When you read this, you will understand, and you will hate me, and that is the price I will pay." And place it into the fire, and watch his name on the back curl into ash. She walked into the storm, with her hand on her belly, and her chin up, and her heart frozen solid, and the snow swallowed her whole. 3 years and 4 months later, in a village called Brindlemoor, that sat at the elbow of 2 rivers no map had ever bothered to name, a woman called Wenna ran the herb stall in the market on the days the road allowed. She was small, narrow-shouldered, with her hair cut short the way widows cut it after the 2nd year of mourning. Her eyes were the color of weak tea. She rarely smiled. The Brindlemoor folk had decided, without ever discussing it, that whatever had happened to her before she walked into their village, half dead in a snowstorm with a swollen belly, was nobody's business. She paid her rent. She knew which root cured a fever and which berry stopped a wound from going green. She had lost her husband, the story went, in a logging accident on the Sable Road. The story had inconsistencies. The Sable Road had no logging camps, but no one in Brindlemoor was rude enough to point this out. Her real name was Malis. She had not said it aloud in 3 years. She had, however, said 2 other names 10,000 times each, Pelin and Iska. They were nearly 3 years old now, and they were, in the unanimous private opinion of every woman in Brindlemoor who had birthed a child of her own, the strangest pair of children ever to walk on 2 feet in that village. It was not their faces, though their faces drew comment. Pelin had his mother's careful mouth and a steady gravity in his eyes that did not belong in a small child. Iska had a laugh like breaking glass and a habit of staring at adults until the adults looked away first. They were beautiful in the unsettling way that made grandmothers touch their own throats and say, bless them, as if to ward something off. It was not their cleverness, though they were clever. Pelin had spoken in full sentences at 14 months. Iska had taught herself to read from the labels on her mother's herb jars before she was 3. It was the other thing, the thing the village did not speak of, the thing Wenna had begged the midwife, the morning after the birth, to swear she would never speak of either. Malis remembered that night the way she remembered the fall of a hammer. She had gone into labor in the worst blizzard the western reaches had seen in 100 years. The roads were closed. The midwife, old Tessimir, who had birthed half the village and most of its goats, had walked 2 miles through chest-deep snow because Milas's neighbor had pounded on her door at moonrise and shouted that the widow at the river bend was screaming. Tessimir had arrived just in time. The boy came first, fast and angry. The girl came 12 minutes later, slower, calmer, looking around the room with her wet new eyes, as if taking inventory. Tessimir had been wiping the girl clean when she went very still. "Wenna," she said, in a voice Malis had never heard her use. "Wenna, look here." Malis lifted her head. On the inside of her daughter's left wrist, exactly the size of a copper coin, glowed a mark. It was not a birthmark. Birthmarks did not glow. It was a thin silver crescent, horns turned inward, with a single point of light at its center, like a star caught between cupped hands. As Malis watched, the light pulsed once in time with the baby's heartbeat. Then again. Then it dimmed, until it was only a faint silver scar. Tessimir's hands were shaking. "The boy," she whispered. "Wenna, the boy." Malis turned her head. Pelin was nursing already, his small, fierce mouth working. Tessimir lifted his wrapping with gentle hands. On the right side of his small chest, just over his heart, the same mark glowed. Crescent, star, pulse, dim. Tessimir sat down on the wooden stool by the bed. She put her face in her hands. "Wenna," she said in a voice that was almost prayer, "I am the third daughter of a woman who served in the Vethar court before the burning of the old library. I know what that mark is. I have known what it is since I was 9 years old, and my grandmother sat me down and told me I would never see it in this life, because there has not been a true-blooded heir to the stag throne born in 87 years. Malis could not speak. "The crescent is the old mark," Tessimir said. "It does not appear on every royal child. It does not appear on bastards. It does not appear on children of arranged matings. It appears only on the children of a true bonded pair within the Vethar line, a king and his fated mate, a bond made by the Mother Moon herself." Outside, the blizzard screamed against the shutters. "2 of them," Tessimir whispered. "Twins, both marked. Wenna, do you understand what you have done?" "I have had 2 children," Malis said. Her voice came from very far away. "I am very tired, Tessimir, and I would like you to swear to me on your grandmother's bones that you will never tell anyone in this village or any other what you saw on their skin tonight. I will pay you whatever I have. Swear it." Tessimir swore it. She kept her oath. She lived another 2 years and died of a cough in her sleep, and in those 2 years she never spoke of the marks again, not to anyone. But she would sometimes look at the twins across the market square, at their small dark heads close together, and her eyes would fill, and she would turn away. The marks did not glow often. They glowed when the children were happy, in flickers. They glowed when frightened, in flares. They had glowed, both at once, the night their mother caught a fever, and the priestess from the next village had laid hands on Malis and said only that she had never felt a fever lift so cleanly in her life, like a hand pulling a cloth off a candle. The marks were the secret beneath Malis's life. She had built that life carefully. The cottage at the river bend, with its thick door and herb garden and single window facing the road so she would see anyone coming. The story of the dead husband. The carefully accented speech that hid the court training in her vowels. The promise she had renewed every morning and night for 3 years and counting. He will never know you exist. She kept her promises. Pelin was teaching Iska how to whistle through a blade of grass, on the front step of the cottage, on the evening the stranger came up the road for the first time. He came at dusk, walking slowly, as if he did not want to startle. He was tall and thin and dressed in traveler's gray, hood up. He stopped at the edge of the property, exactly at the edge, where the path through Melis's garden met the public road, and he stood there, and he looked. He did not speak. He did not approach. After a long moment, in which the only sound was Iska's small breath blowing across the grass blade in her brother's fingers, the stranger turned and walked back the way he had come. Milas watched him from the kitchen window with her hand wrapped around the haft of the iron poker she kept by the door. The next night, he came again. Same time, same distance, same long silent looking, same retreat. The third night, she was waiting for him. She stood in the doorway with the poker in her hand, and the twins inside the cottage with the door barred, and her oldest friend in the village, a midwife's apprentice named Dorianne, sitting by the hearth with a kitchen knife and instructions to scream if Melis screamed first. "You will state your business," Melis called across the garden, "or you will leave this road and not return, and if you return I will kill you, and I will not lose a moment of sleep over it." The stranger stood very still in the dusk. He pushed back his hood. His hair had gone almost entirely white in the 3 years since she had last seen him, but the long jaw and the deep-set eyes and the careful way he held his shoulders were the same. He had been the captain of the king's personal guard, the one Corin called brother in private, though they shared no blood. His name was Vasek. Melis's grip on the poker did not loosen. "My lady," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I have been searching for you for 2 years and 7 months. I am alone. I have told no one. I will leave at your word and never return. But before I do, I beg you to hear what I have come to say." Behind her, in the cottage, one of the twins sneezed. Vasek's eyes flicked, just once, toward the sound. He did not see them. The door was closed. The shutters were drawn. He could not have seen them. But his face did something then, something between hope and dread. And he sank to one knee on the muddy road like a man who had been waiting a very long time to put his weight down. "There are children, then," he said softly. "Mother of moons, he was right." Melis raised the poker. "You will say one more sentence," she said, "and it will be the last one before you leave. Choose it carefully." Vasek looked up at her from the road. His eyes, in the gloom, were wet. "He did not banish you because he did not want you," Vasek said. "He banished you because they were going to kill you, and he was the only one who could make them believe he had stopped wanting you in time. And he has been dying of it, my lady, and every day for 3 years." Melis's hand on the poker began, very slowly, to shake. She did not let him into the cottage. She led him into the woodshed, which was attached to the cottage by a covered walk and which had a door that locked from the outside. She made him sit on the chopping block while she stood in the doorway with the poker still in her hand, and she made Dorianne stay with the children with the kitchen knife and instructions to bar herself in the cellar if anything went wrong. Then she said, "Tell me, from the beginning, and if you lie to me, Vasek, even by a single word, you will leave this village in a box." Vasek bowed his head. "Do you remember," he began, "the council messenger who came up from the southern reaches in the autumn before he sent you away?" Melis cast her mind back. The messenger she remembered had been a thin man with a permanent cough and a sealed bag from the Sable Reach negotiations. She had brought him broth twice. "He carried more than the negotiations," Vasek said. "He carried a name written on a single piece of paper, in a hand the king recognized. The name was yours." Underneath the name was a date. The date was 3 weeks from the day the paper was delivered. What kind of date? Melis said, though she already knew. The date by which you were to be dead. Vasek's voice did not change. He was reciting, she realized. The paper came from the Vathar elders, from within the king's own house. 6 of them sealed it. They had drawn lots. 3 voted to come to him openly. 3 voted to act without telling him. Lots had broken the tie. The ones who voted to act without telling him won. The note to him was a courtesy from one of the losing 3, a final courtesy sent in secret, to give him time to decide what kind of king he would be. The poker was very heavy in Melis's hand. She set it carefully against the woodshed wall. Why, she said. Because they had counted the moons since he had first taken you to the eastern landing. Because they had eyes in every kitchen in the keep. Because one of the laundry women had washed a stain from one of your dresses that was not the stain of a woman's monthly time. They knew what you were carrying, my lady. They knew before you knew. And they had decided that no half-blood child of an unsanctioned pairing would ever sit in the chair of the running stag. She had to put a hand on the doorframe. He came to me, Vasek said, the night he received the note. He had not slept. He sat on the floor of his oratory like a child and asked me what to do. I told him the truth. I told him that if he claimed you publicly, the elders would move within the day. If he hid you in the keep, within the week. If he sent you to a holdfast under guard, within the month, because Vether gold buys Vether guards. The only path on which you lived, and your child lived, was the path on which he convinced every one of them that he had used you and discarded you, and that you carried nothing of his that any elder need fear. He could have told me, Melis said. Her voice was not her own. He wrote you a letter, Vasek said quietly. He sealed it with his own ring and set it on the table beside him through the entire ceremony, so that he could give it to you afterward. And then, when you walked out of that room with your face like a stone, he understood that if he gave you the letter, you would believe him, and you would hesitate, and the elders' eyes would see hope on you, and they would send a knife after you on the road that very night. So he burned it, Melis said. He burned it. I watched him burn it. And then he was sick, my lady, on the stones of his own oratory, until there was nothing left in him to be sick with. She slid down the doorframe and sat on the threshold of the woodshed, because her legs would not hold her any longer. 3 years of teaching herself to hate him. 3 years of practicing his name as a curse word. 3 years of looking at her son and seeing his father's jaw and feeling a small reflexive flinch of resentment. He had been protecting her. He had been protecting them. She put her face in her hands and did not cry. The thing inside her was bigger than crying. It was the careful, beautiful, terrible architecture of 3 years of survival, and it was being dismantled brick by a man on a chopping block in a woodshed, and she did not know what would be left of her when he was done. "Why now?" she said into her hands. "Why have you come now, after 3 years?" "Because the elders have moved again," Vasek said. She lifted her head. 2 months ago, he said, the Vathar line came under formal challenge for the first time in 9 generations. A cousin of the king's mother, a man named Sarowin of the Bonehold, has filed a claim on the throne. He claims the king is unfit, that he has no heir, and will produce no heir, because he has not taken a sanctioned mate in the 3 years since the council disposed of the unsanctioned one. He claims the line is dying in the king's body, and that he, Sarowin, is the closest of that blood remaining. Is he? He is. A small wind moved through the gap under the woodshed door. And so the elders, Melis said slowly, the same elders who killed me in their hearts 3 years ago, those elders are now in a position where the only thing standing between Sarowin and the throne is a sanctioned heir of the king's body. Yes. Which they made certain he could not have. Yes. And so he sent you to find me. Vasek shook his head. He did not send me. He does not know I am here. He does not know you are alive. He believes, because I have told him every year on the anniversary of the night you walked into the snow, that I have searched and found nothing, and that you are likely buried somewhere on the Greythorn Road, and that he must learn to live with it. Vasek's voice caught. I have lied to my king every year of those 3 years, my lady. I have lied because I was afraid that if he knew you were alive, he would ride out to find you within the hour, and Sarowin's people would follow him, and they would find what he found, and your children would be dead before sunset. Then why? She said again. Why now? Vasek lifted his head. Because 3 nights ago, he said, a black-feathered bird flew down out of the east and landed on the rail of the king's balcony, and it carried a sealed message in a leather tube on its leg. The seal was the Bonehold seal. The message was 4 lines long. I read it over the king's shoulder before he could stop me. What did it say? Vasek closed his eyes. We know about the woman of the Hollow Reach, he recited. We know she did not die. We know there are 2 of them. We know where. The hunt is already on the road. Renounce the throne by the next moon, and they will live. Hold the throne, and you will bury them yourself. The woodshed went absolutely silent. Malus sat on the threshold and watched a small black beetle climb very slowly up the bark of one of the split logs stacked behind Vasek. And she thought in a strange detached way that she had been a fool. A fool to believe a secret could be kept for 3 years in a world that contained more than one person. A fool to believe the silver mark on her children's skin was a thing that could be hidden by a closed door and a lie about a logger. How long? She said. The bird came 3 nights ago. It had been on the wing perhaps 4 days before that. Bonehold riders in light kit, traveling fast, would be perhaps 6 days behind the bird. I have been a day and a half ahead of them since I crossed the Greythorn, and I have spent the last 3 evenings standing at the edge of your garden because I did not know how to walk up to your door without breaking you. Vasek's hands were trembling on his knees. They will be here, tomorrow, perhaps the night after, no later than that. She stood up. She picked up the poker. Stay where you are, she said. Do not enter my house. Do not speak to my children. Do not move from this woodshed until I come back for you. My lady, do not. She walked out of the woodshed and across the covered walk and into her cottage, and she barred the door behind her, and Dorian looked up from the hearth with the kitchen knife still in her hand and said, Wenna, your face. Pack, Malus said. Pack everything that will fit on a single horse, the children's winter cloaks, the bone knife from under my bed, the pouch of silver behind the loose stone in the chimney, the blue dress folded at the bottom of my chest, not for wearing, only the dress. Do not unfold it. Do not look at it. Just pack it. Be done in an hour. Wenna, what is... In an hour, Dorian. Dorian went. Malus crossed the small main room of the cottage to where the twins were sitting on the rag rug by the hearth. Pelin had Iska's foot in his lap and was very seriously examining a splinter in the pad of her big toe. Iska was watching him with the patient, slightly bored expression of a small queen. Malus knelt down on the rug beside them. She put one hand on her son's dark head and one hand on her daughter's, and she felt, very faintly, like the warmth of a banked coal, the pulse of the marks under their skin. The marks she had spent 3 years pretending were not there. The marks the elders had killed her for before she was even gone, and would kill her children for if they could. My loves, she said softly, we are going to take a journey tonight. Iska looked up at her with her solemn dark eyes. To where? The little girl said. Malus took a breath that hurt all the way down. To meet your father, she said. Outside, the first crow of the evening called from the woods at the edge of the property. It was answered very faintly by another, then by a third. The hunt was on the road. They did not make it to the horse. Malus had Doriana's mare saddled in the lean-to, and the twins bundled into their winter cloaks before the moon was fully up, and she had Vasek out of the woodshed and onto his own gray gelding, and she was walking back across the yard with Iska on her hip and Pelin's small hand in her free hand when the first arrow took the mare in the throat. The horse went down without a sound. That was the worst of it, the silence. The mare folded sideways into the trampled snow, and her breath went out of her in a long, surprised hiss. Malis did not freeze. She had imagined this moment for 3 years. Her body knew what to do before her mind caught up. She turned, putting her own back between the twins in the dark of the trees, and shouted, "Vasek, now!" and ran. Not toward the cottage. She ran toward the root cellar at the back of the herb garden, set into the slope of the riverbank itself, with 3 feet of packed earth above and a half-rotted second door that opened onto the river path. Iska's arms were locked around her neck. Pelin ran at her hip. A second arrow took bark from the apple tree as she passed. A third hit Vasek. She heard the wet thump of it, heard him grunt, heard the gelding scream and bolt, and she did not turn to look. She got the children to the cellar door, dragged it open, shoved Pelin in ahead of her, and went down the 3 earthen steps with her daughter still clinging to her throat. She pulled the door shut and dropped the iron bar across it, and stood in the absolute dark of her own root cellar, with her heart hitting her ribs so hard she could feel it in her teeth. "Mama," Pelin said very quietly, in the dark. "Quiet, my love." She felt along the shelf for the tallow stub and the strike iron, got a small flame on the third try, and turned to look at her children. The bottom of her chest dropped out. The marks were glowing. Not the small flicker she had seen 100 times. Not the soft pulse of contented sleep. The crescents on her son's chest and her daughter's wrist were burning silver white, bright enough to throw her own shadow on the wall behind her, bright enough that Pelin was looking down at himself with the calm, puzzled expression of a child watching his own hand do something interesting. "Mama," Iska said, in the small, clear voice she used when she had a question she expected an honest answer to. "What is happening?" Above their heads, through 3 feet of packed earth, Malis heard the cottage door come off its hinges, boots on the floorboards, a man's voice, young, hard, clipped, saying, "Check the loft. Where is she? Where is she? Where is she?" The clay jar she had kept her mother's bone comb in shattered against the hearthstones, and she felt that one in her throat and pushed it down. "Iska, Pelin, listen to me." The marks pulsed. "There are bad men in our house. We are going to be very quiet, and we are going to walk along this wall to that small door at the other end, and we are going to go out of that door and along the river path, and we are not going to make any sound at all. Do you understand?" Pelin nodded once. Iska said, "Mama, the marks are too bright. They will see us." Malis stared at her. The child was 3 years old, and she had looked down at her own glowing wrist and understood, in the time it had taken Malis to light a candle, that the light on her skin was a thing that could be tracked. "Can you make them stop?" Iska considered. She closed her small fist around her own wrist. Her face went very still. The light under her fingers flickered, dimmed, held a moment at a low ember glow, went out. Pelin, watching his sister, copied her. The light over his heart guttered and died. "Good," Malis whispered. "Both of you, come." She blew out the tallow. The small back door creaked when it opened. She stopped, counted 3 breaths. No boots came running. She eased the door the rest of the way open and lifted Iska through and reached back for Pelin, and she stepped onto the river path and began to run. Behind her, the cottage was burning. She did not turn to see. They burned what they searched, these men. The light of it reached her on the river path as a long red flicker on the water, and she ran, and the twins did not cry. And somewhere very far away in her head, she filed the thought that she would have to think later about how her 3-year-olds had known not to cry. The river path bent into the willow grove. The trees grew so close that no horse could follow. The shallow water under them ran for half a mile to the old ford, and the ford crossed to the deep wood. She had walked the route in her head 1,000 times. She had never walked it with her feet. She was halfway down the slope into the willows when the man stepped out from behind the largest of the trees. He was not breathing hard. He had run her down on foot through unfamiliar ground at night, and he was not breathing hard. He wore the dark riding leather of the bone-holed cavalry. He held a curved knife low against his thigh, in the easy grip of a man who had held that knife in many gardens like this one. "Lady of the Hollow Reach," he said. His voice was almost gentle. "Set the children down. We have no quarrel with you tonight. The contract is for the children only. Set them down and walk on, and I will tell my master you ran." Mylis did not set the children down. She was aware, in a strange, clear way, that she was about to die. She tightened her arms around Iska. She pushed Pelin behind her hip with her free hand. She opened her mouth. She did not know what she was going to say, when the marks went off. Not flickered, not pulsed, went off. The light came up out of her son and her daughter at the same instant, two great silver-white pillars of it, and the shadows of the willow grove leapt and twisted around them as if a moon had been lit underground. The man's eyes went wide, and he flung up his free arm to shield his face. And that was the moment Pelin, 3 years old, behind his mother's hip, did what neither he nor anyone living had ever done before. He pushed. He did not move. His small body did not move. But the air in front of him moved. The air and the snow, and a fan of dry willow leaves and packed earth. And the man in the riding leather was lifted off his feet and thrown backward into the trunk of the largest willow, with a sound that Mylis felt in her own bones. He slid down the trunk into a sitting position. The curved knife slipped out of his fingers into the snow. He did not get up. The light from the children dimmed, went out. Pelin looked up at his mother. "Mama," he said in his small, grave voice, "I think I broke him." Mylis got down on her knees in the snow and put her arms around both her children and held them so hard that Iska made a small surprised sound, and she pressed her face into the crown of her son's hair, and she said the only thing she could think to say. "You did not break anything that did not need to be broken. Walk, walk, my love, walk." They walked. They walked through the willows and across the shallows of the old ford, with the cold water reaching her knees, and the children held high against her shoulders. And they walked into the deep wood, and they walked until Pelin's small head dropped against her shoulder, and Iska's grip on her hair went slack with sleep. And even then she walked, because she did not know what else to do. She walked until she heard the wolves. They were running, the soft crush of wide paws on snow, a sound she had not heard in 3 years, running toward her, fast, in a coordinated line through the trees on her left. She stopped on the deer path with her sleeping children in her arms. She did not run. There was nowhere to run to. The first of the wolves came out of the dark on the path ahead of her and stopped. He was enormous. His coat was the deep iron gray of weathered slate, and his eyes, even in the broken moonlight, were the color of river stones in summer light. He stood across the path with his great chest rising and falling and looked at her, and at the bundled child against her shoulder, and at the bundled child in the crook of her other arm, and his great body began, very slowly, to shake. The shift came on him kneeling. By the time it was done, he was a man again, his hair longer than she remembered and shot through with gray she had not put there. He did not look up. "Mylis," he said. His voice was a wreck. "I will not come closer. I will not touch you. I have run from the eastern keep without stopping, because my beta sent a bird that said only they live, and the hunt is on them, and ride. I beg you, only tell me they are alive." Pelin stirred against her shoulder. The little boy lifted his head. He looked, in the broken moonlight, at the man on his knees on the path. He squinted, in the way of a small child, trying to puzzle out a face he had never seen. And then, before Mylis could think of a single thing in the world to say, her 3-year-old son spoke. "Mama," Pelin said clearly, "is that the father?" Corin made a sound she would carry to her grave. He pressed his forehead, very slowly, into the snow, and his shoulders went, and the great alpha of the running stag wept on his own lands for the first time in his life, within hearing of the children he had not known he had, because some part of him, the part the bond had never let go, had always known. Melis stood on the path with her sleeping daughter in her arms and her wide-awake son on her hip, and looked down at the bowed head of the man she had spent 3 years teaching herself to hate. And she did not move toward him, and she did not move away. "Get off your knees," she said. Her voice was not gentle, it was not cruel. "Get off your knees, Coran of the Vether line. You do not get to kneel, not yet. Stand up, look at me, and then look at them." He stood. He stood like a man rising under a great weight. His face was older, thinner. There was a long, pale scar down the line of the left jaw she did not remember, and a hardness in the corners of the mouth she did not remember. "Look at her too," Melis said. Iska was still asleep against Melis's shoulder. "She is your daughter. Her name is Iska. The boy is Pelin. They are nearly 3. They were born in a snowstorm in a stranger's barn because their mother did not want to die alone in a ditch. They are alive because a captain you trusted lied to you for 3 years to keep them so." Her voice did not shake. "Look at them, Corin. Tell me what you see." He looked. "I see," he said, his voice very low. "The 2 faces I have been seeing every night in dreams for 3 years. I did not know they were faces. I see the marks under their skin, even though their skin is covered, because the bond knows them, and so do I. I see that you have kept them whole. I see that you have done it without me. I see that I have no right, that you have not earned the power to refuse me. And I will refuse no thing you ask. Not tonight, not ever." He was not pleading. He was stating terms. She looked at him, at the long pale scar, at the gray in his hair. "You will not die tonight," she said. "Neither will I. Neither will they. We are going to walk out of this wood. You are going to give me your cloak because mine is wet through. You are going to send one of your wolves ahead to find a holdfast that can be locked and warmed for one night. You are going to sit on the floor of that holdfast with your back against the wall, and I am going to put your son in your lap because he asked. And then you and I are going to talk, and I am going to listen, and I am going to decide, in my own time, what I do with what I hear. Do you understand me, Coran?" "Yes," he said. She nodded once. She stepped past him on the path with her children in her arms, and she did not look back to see whether he followed, because she knew that he did. The holdfast was a stone shepherd's tower on a bare ridge 2 hours' walk from the deer path, abandoned for at least a generation, but still sound. A single round room above a single round room, a slate roof, a heavy door of black oak that the lead wolf had thrown himself against until the rusted bar inside snapped, and a hearth large enough to roast a calf in. By the time Melis came in out of the cold, 2 of the wolves had shifted into men and laid a fire and set water on it to boil, and one of them, a thin young man with a face full of freckles she did not know, had spread a folded saddle blanket on the stones in front of the hearth and bowed himself out of the room without lifting his eyes higher than her boots. Vasek, alive, pale as ash, with a strip of linen wrapped tight under his left arm, sat by the lower door with a drawn sword across his knees. He looked up when she came in. He did not speak. She nodded to him. He nodded back. 3 years of him lying to his king to keep her children alive, and that was their whole conversation. She climbed the inner stair. Coran was already in the upper room. He stood by the small high window with his back to it, and when she came up through the floor he stepped backward, deliberately, until his shoulders were against the curve of the wall, giving her the room, letting her see that he was giving her the room. She set Iska down on the saddle blanket. The child did not wake. Pelin, who had walked the last hour on his own small legs because he had insisted, sat down beside his sister and arranged his cloak around her shoulders, and then sat very still, looking at the man against the wall with his solemn dark eyes. Melis crossed to the hearth and held her hands out to the heat until they began to hurt. "Talk," she said, without turning around. Coran talked. He told her, in the careful, flat voice of a man making a report he had rehearsed, about the messenger from the southern reaches, and the paper with her name on it, and the lots the elders had drawn. He told her things Vasek had not: the smell of the council's bayberry candle wax, which she would never again be able to smell without flinching; the particular phrasing he had drilled into himself in the hour before she walked through the door; the words he had chosen because they would be unforgivable, and because unforgivable was the only register the elders' eyes would believe. He told her about the letter he had burned. He told her, and here, for the first time, his voice did something, that he had meant to ride after her, the night she walked into the snow, that he had been at the stable with his horse half saddled when Vasek had come down and put a hand on the saddle and said, "If you ride out of this gate tonight, sire, every elder in this keep will know within the hour that you sent her away in pretense, and there will be a knife in her back before the second moonrise." He had stood there with his hand on the saddle for a very long time, and then he had unsaddled the horse himself, slowly, buckle by buckle, and walked back up the spiral stair, and in the year that followed he had taken the keep apart from the inside. He told her about that, about the elder he had quietly removed from the council on a charge of misappropriated tithes, about the second elder who had died of a bad oyster at the midwinter feast, and how Koran had chosen, the morning after, not to ask his master of the hunt where the oyster had come from; about the third elder, the woman, who had simply disappeared one morning, and whose name was no longer spoken in the keep. "I have spent 3 years," he said, "killing, by inches, the men and women in my own house who killed you. I did not know whether you were alive. I did it anyway, because I could not do anything else and continue to be a man, and because I told myself that if you were alive somewhere, I wanted the road back to my door to be a little shorter." "How many are left?" "2 of the original 7, Koran said, and the man who paid them. He is my mother's first cousin. I held him on my knee when I was a child, and I called him uncle until I was 12, and the day I learned what he had done, I sat in my own privy and was sick for an hour." "Sarowin of the Bonehold," Melis said. Koran lifted his head. "Vasek told me," she said, "on the chopping block, in my woodshed, an hour before your hunters took the door off my house." "Yes," Koran said. "He filed the formal challenge 2 months ago. The bird he sent to my balcony 3 nights past was the first time he has ever signed his own name to anything he has done against me." "Why now?" "Because he found out about the children, and he understood, the moment he found out, that I would never renounce them. He wanted me to know he had already put a rider within a mile of them. He wanted the first wound to be his." Koran's mouth twisted. "He has always loved a first wound." Pelin, on the saddle blanket, said, "Mama." Melis turned. "Mama, the father is sad." "Yes," she said to her son, "he is sad." "Why?" "Because he has not seen you before." Pelin considered this with the full weight of his 3 years, and then he stood up and walked, on his short, careful legs, across the round room toward the man against the wall. He stopped a foot away from his father and tilted his head back. "You are very tall," the little boy said. "Yes," Koran said. The word was almost not a word. "Did you come a long way?" "Yes." "Are you cold?" "Yes." Pelin extended his small hand. He laid it very precisely on the back of his father's much larger hand. The mark over Pelin's heart, hidden under his clothes, flickered once. Melis felt it as a small warm tug under her own breastbone, and then was still. "You can sit down now," Pelin said. "Mama said, on the floor, with your back on the wall." Koran slid down the curve of the wall and sat. He did it slowly, the way a man lowers a great weight he has been carrying. When he was on the floor, Pelin climbed into his lap with the easy authority of a small boy who had decided a thing. He arranged himself sideways against his father's chest. He yawned. "You smell like a wolf," Pelin informed him. "I am one." Mama said, "Iska is asleep. I am tired." "Sleep then." You will not go away. No. Promise. On my life. Pelin nodded once, satisfied, and put his small, dark head against his father's shoulder and closed his eyes. Malis turned her face away from them, toward the fire, because there was a thing happening in her chest that she did not want either of them to see. When she turned around, Corin was looking at her over the top of their son's head. His eyes were full. I will not ask anything of you, he said quietly. I know you have not earned the right. I will tell you what I have to do, and I will tell you what I think you should do, and you will choose. What do you have to do? I have to be back in the Eastern Keep within 4 days. Sarowyn will move on the throne the night of the next full moon. That is 6 days from tonight. If I am back in the keep before the moon, with proof of the children's parentage, I can summon the assembled packs and present the heirs before he can present the challenge, and the challenge collapses. Proof, Malis said. The marks. She closed her eyes. The marks were the only proof the assembled packs would accept. Twins, born to a true bonded pair, both bearing the crescent. There had been no record of such a thing in 8 generations. The moment Pelin and Iska stood before the assembled packs and the marks lit, every house in the kingdom would know, instantly, that the running stag had its true heirs again, and every house in the kingdom would know that Pelin and Iska existed. They will be hunted, she said, for the rest of their lives. Every faction that ever wanted the Vethar line ended will know exactly which 2 children in the kingdom are worth a knife. Yes. You are asking me to hand my children to you and to a court that already tried to kill them once. I am not asking, I am telling you the situation. If you say no, I will go back to the keep alone, and I will fight Sarowyn's challenge with no proof, and I will lose, and the Bonehold will take the throne. That is one path. It is a real path. I do not want you to choose the other path because you feel sorry for me. I want your judgment. She knelt on the saddle blanket beside her sleeping daughter. She put her hand on the small, warm shape of Iska's back. She felt, through 3 layers of cloth, the steady drum of the mark beating in time with her own heart. She had carried these 2 heartbeats for 3 years. She had been right to carry them alone. And the man she had hated for 3 years had been killing his own elders one by one in a silent war he could not name, to make a road she might one day walk back down. They had both been right. On opposite sides of a wall the elders had built between them. The wall was down now. We go with you, she said. Coran closed his eyes. At first light, all 4 of us. Vasek too. Every wolf in this tower. She paused. And one more thing, Coran. Anything. When we ride into your keep, I do not ride behind you. I ride at your right hand, and your right hand only. And every man and woman in your court who looks at me will understand, before I even dismount, that the woman they sent into the snow 3 years ago is not the woman who came back. Do you understand me? Yes, my queen, he said. A horn blew, very faint, very far away in the dark. Vasek's voice came up the stair, sharp and clipped. My king, riders on the south ridge, Bonehold colors, 20 at least, coming hard. Corin's hand closed gently around the back of his sleeping son's head. His eyes did not leave Malis's face. Then we ride sooner than first light, he said. They rode in the last black hour before dawn, with the wind off the ridge cutting the breath out of their chests, and the children slung in oilskin carriers against the bodies of 2 of Coran's sworn wolves. Iska against the freckled young man, whose name she had finally been told was Halvard, and Pelin against a tall woman with a braid the color of wet rope, whose name was Eshina. Coran rode at the head. Vasek, white as parchment but upright in the saddle, rode at the rear. The Bonehold riders found their trail an hour after sunrise. It was not a battle exactly. It was a long-running thing, drawn out across half a day and 40 miles of broken country. A brief, vicious clash at a ford or a defile, then breaking and running, then resuming. Malis lost count of the dead on both sides at 6. By midday, she had stopped looking at the snow when she rode past it. Corin fought from horseback and from wolfback and from his own 2 feet, and twice she saw him take a wound, and twice she saw him simply ride on, as if the wound were a thing he had loaned to his body and would collect from it later. She had loved a man, she understood. She had not understood what kind of king the man was. She did now. She was not idle. In the third skirmish, on the lip of a small stone bridge, when a bone-hold rider came around the side of Halvard's horse with a curved knife already moving toward the bundle on Halvard's chest, it was Malis who put her own riding knife into the side of the man's neck from her saddle, leaning so far across that she nearly came off her horse. She had never killed anyone before. She thought, briefly, that she would feel more about it. Then the next rider came. By the time they reached the bridge of black stone across the Vathar that marked the last hour's ride to the keep, half of Corin's wolves were dead. Vasek was riding with his face the color of old wax, and Eshene was riding one-handed because her left arm hung at a wrong angle. The keep rose ahead on the long ridge as the sun went down, and the bell over the gate was ringing, 3 short and 1 long, the call to the assembled packs. "Milas," Corin said, reining in beside her on the bridge. Blood had dried in his hair. "From here in, we do not stop. Not for any reason. Not for me. If I fall, you ride. You take the children to the great hall, and you stand on the dais, and you uncover their marks yourself, and you say, in a voice the whole hall can hear, 'These are the heirs of the Vathar line, and I am their mother, and you will kneel. Do you understand me?'" Yes. They rode through the gate. The courtyard went silent in a wave, starting at the gate and running outward to the walls. As Corin dismounted and lifted Malis down, and as Halvard lifted Iska from the carrier, and Eshene lifted Pelin from hers and placed him into Malis's arms, the silence held. A court that had not seen its king for 4 days, and had not seen its king's true mate ever, taking the measure of what was walking through its gate. The doors of the great hall opened. 300 wolves filled the long hall to its black-beamed roof. Pack leaders and house heads, the standing council, the speakers for the outer packs. At the foot of the dais, in a half-circle of his people in bone-hold colors, stood a tall, thin man with silver in his hair and a long scar down the left side of his face. A face that had been her king's face 30 years younger. Sarowyn smiled when he saw them. "Cousin," he said. His voice carried easily in the hush. "You ride into your hall in blood, with a peasant woman and what appears to be a pair of foundling children on the eve of a contested succession. I confess I had hoped you would make this easier on yourself." Corin did not answer him. He walked the length of the great hall with Malis at his right hand and the twins between them. He turned at the foot of the dais. He raised his right hand. "I claim the dais," he said, "as Corin of the Vethar line, 9th of that line to wear the running stag. Will any wolf in this hall deny me the dais?" Sarowyn's mouth tightened. The formula was old, older than the keep. He could not deny him here now, before the formal opening of the council. "None deny," he said through his teeth. "Mount." Corin mounted with Malis on his right hand and the twins between them, which was not a thing any king of the Vathar line had ever done before. A murmur went through the hall. He let it go through. "There is a challenge before this council," he said, "filed by Sarowyn of the Bonehold, 2 months past, alleging that the Vathar line has no living heir. I will answer it now." He turned to Malis. "With your leave, my queen." She nodded once. She knelt on the dais and undid the wrappings of her son's small cloak. Pelin blinked up at her with his solemn dark eyes. He understood. She did not have to tell him. She pulled the front of his shirt down to bare his small chest. "Now, my love," she whispered. The mark lit. It came up out of her son's small chest like a true moon coming up over a hill, slow and clean and impossible to mistake, and the silver white of it threw her own face into sharp relief and threw the running stag banner above the throne into sharp relief, and threw the face of Sarowin into a sharp relief he did not want it thrown into. A sound went through the great hall, the sound 300 wolves make when looking all at once at a thing they have been told they would never see in this life. Melis turned to her daughter. Halvard, white-faced, was already kneeling beside her with Iska in his arms. He laid the little girl gently across Melis's knees. Melis pulled back the sleeve of her left wrist. The mark there lit before Melis touched it. The two lights threw a single shadow across the dais. Not Melis's, not Coran's, but the shadow of the running stag, because the silver of the marks fell across the great banner behind them, and the embroidered stag on that banner stood up out of the cloth in its own shadow, and the assembled packs saw it, and the assembled packs went, in a single slow wave, to their knees. All 300. Even after a long moment, the men in bone-hold colors. Sarowin did not kneel. He moved fast, for an old man. The throwing knife came out of his sleeve in a single smooth motion, and his arm went back, and his eyes, fixed not on Coran, not on Melis, but on the small, bright body of Pelin, narrowed. He did not finish the throw. Iska, 3 years old, sitting on her mother's knee, her wrist still lit, looked at him. She did not move. Her small dark face did not change. But the air between her and Sarowin moved, the way it had moved in the willow grove, and the throwing knife in Sarowin's hand turned in the air before it left his fingers, and went sideways, and buried itself to the hilt in the wooden post of the side banner 6 feet to his left. Sarowin looked at his empty hand. He had time, before Coran reached him, to look up at the dais one more time, and to see that the small bright girl on her mother's knee had her mother's exact face, and that she had not even taken her hand off her own wrist. Then Coran was on him. He took Sarowin of the bonehold by the throat with one hand and lifted him off his feet. "You filed a challenge upon false ground. You sent men, 3 nights past, to kill the heirs you claimed I did not have. You drew steel in this hall against a child of the Vethar line. The penalty for any of these, alone, is death. The penalty for all of them, at once, is also death. We are limited in that direction." The wolves of Coran's house took Sarowin out. Coran climbed back onto the dais and stood beside Melis, at her left hand now. He raised both his hands to the assembled packs, who had not yet risen. "I present to this council Melis of the Hollow Reach, my true mate, by bond made under the mother moon. I present Pelin and Iska of the Vethar line, my children by her, twins, marked of the running stag. There will be no other queen of these lands while I draw breath. There will be no other heirs of my body. The line of the running stag is here. It is whole. It is alive, and I will spend the rest of my reign earning the woman who kept it alive while I could not." The assembled packs rose, slowly in a wave, and they laid their right hands flat against their own hearts, and they bowed their heads, all at the same time, and they held the bow. It was the oath of recognition. It had not been given to a queen of the Vethar line in 87 years. And from somewhere very far down in the lower keep, a single bell began to ring. The bell of the bone readers. The bell that was rung only when the mother moon was thought to have spoken in the kingdom. It had not been rung, Coran had once told her, in his lifetime. Vasek slumped against the wall at the foot of the dais with his hand pressed to a red bloom under his cloak, looked up. His eyes met Melis's. He smiled very faintly. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile. Then his head went down against the stone, and his hand went limp, and the smile stayed. She was off the dais before the smile finished settling on Vasek's face. She knelt in front of him and put her hand under his jaw. The skin was wrong, too cool, the particular cool of a body that had gone past arguing with itself. His pulse, when she found it, was a small bird's pulse, fast and weak and far away. Vasek. His eyes opened. With a great effort, they came the rest of the way to her. My lady. His voice was almost not there. You have been bleeding under that cloak since the bridge. Longer, since the woodshed, if I am honest. I miscounted. You did not miscount. You got us to the dais. Be quiet. Corin was already kneeling on the other side of him. Sire, Vasek said, I lied to you. Every year, on the anniversary. I know, Coran said softly. I knew the second year. I let you keep doing it because I trusted that on the day she could be brought home, you would bring her home. You have brought her home, Vasek. Oh, Vasek said, in the small, surprised voice of a man learning a thing he had not known. Oh, good. His eyes went to Melis. The boy, Pelin, when he is older. Tell him there was a man called Vasek who lied to a king for him before he was born. Not so he remembers me. So he understands what people will do for a child that the bond chose. I will tell him, she said. Both of them, every year, on your name day. Good, Vasek said. Thank you, my lady. Coran lifted Vasek's bloodied hand and pressed it, very gently, against his own forehead. He did not speak. Vasek's hand relaxed against his king's brow. His eyes did not close all the way. They simply, gradually, were not looking at anything anymore. The small bird pulse fluttered twice, then it did not flutter. Melis closed his eyes with 2 fingers, the way her mother had closed the eyes of her brothers in the winter of the bad cough. She took the small bone token of his rank from his throat. Every captain of the King's Guard wore one, the size of a thumbnail, carved from the antler of the running stag, and she held it tight in her palm until the bone bit into her skin. She stood up. She turned around. She walked back across the slate to the dais, and she climbed it. And she took her son out of Isheni's arms, and she took her daughter back from Halvard. And she stood between her 2 children, with her left hand on Pelin's shoulder, and her right hand in Iska's hand, and she faced the hall. This man, she said, lifting the bone token so it caught the torchlight, has just paid the last debt of 3 years that should not have been paid by any of us. His name was Vasek of the Long Watch. By my voice, and by the voice of the king at my left hand, his name will be spoken on every name day of the running stag from this night until the line ends. The bell of the bone readers, which is ringing for him now, will ring for him every year on this date for as long as it has a clapper. The hall said nothing for a long moment. Then a single voice, somewhere in the middle, an old woman's voice, cracked and used, said, So spoken, so done. The Pax took it up. 300 mouths, clear and flat and at the same volume. So spoken, so done. Corin turned his head and looked at her. He did not say anything. He did not need to. 7 years passed. Sarowyn was tried and condemned and executed on the morning of the 3rd day. The 2 surviving elders were stripped of their houses and exiled. The bonehold itself was placed under stewardship of the crown, and what came out of it was used, slowly and methodically, to find every other house in the kingdom that had taken Sarowyn's coin. 5 houses fell, 2 reformed and were spared. Halvard of the Freckles became the new captain of the King's Guard. He kept Vasek's bone token in a small wooden box, and he took it out on the anniversary of the night of the dais. And he sat with Pelin and Iska and told them the story of the woodshed and the bridge, and the man who had ridden a day and a half ahead of his death to give their mother time. He told it the same way every year. The children listened every year as if hearing it for the first time, because their mother had taught them, some stories are things you owe. Eshen, healed slowly and walking with a stiffness in her left shoulder, took the speaker's seat for the outer Pax. The Standing Council was rebuilt at 11 seats, 4 of them women, which had not been true of the council in 3 generations. The bond between Melis and Coran completed in the late summer of the year after, on a warm night with the smell of cut hay coming up from the lower fields. He had courted her, that year, the way a man courts a woman he understands he has lost the right to. She had said you will earn back, slowly, and she had meant it. When she finally walked down the long gallery in her bare feet and pushed open the door of his chamber, he turned and saw her, and his face did the thing it had done on the deer path, and again at the dais. The thing it did when she had handed him something he had not believed he was going to be handed. The bell of the bone readers rang again in the 4th year, because Iska, age 7, walked one summer evening into the deep stone of the lower keep on her own small feet, and put her hand on the rope and pulled. The bone reader on duty, a very old man named Halen, who had been waiting 30 years to see what he had been told he would never see, wept quietly and asked her why she had rung the bell, and Iska said, with the small judicial gravity her mother would never quite get used to, because the moon told me to. She wants to come down. She wants to talk to me. I think it is going to be all right. Pelin, her brother, did not ring any bells. He rode out alone in his 9th year and presented himself to the Speaker of the Eastern Reaches and requested 3 days' instruction in the formal forms of pack law. He came home and walked into Coron's solar and proposed 3 amendments to the form of the succession trial. The council adopted all 3. On the 7th anniversary of the night of the dais, Melis stood on the wall walk of the high keep at sunset, with her king's hand in her own. Below, in the lower bailey, her son was teaching her daughter a sword form he had no business teaching her, and her daughter was correcting him in the polite voice she used when she was about to win an argument. Melis leaned against Coron. He had gray at his temples now that was not from grief. She had a small line at the corner of her mouth that had come in during the 2nd year of motherhood, and stayed. "Do you remember," she said, "what you said on the dais? About earning. Every word. Have you stopped?" "No," he said. "I have not stopped. I will not stop. I was not, when I said it, talking about a thing with an end. I was talking about a thing with a shape. I am still walking it." "Good," she said. "Keep walking it." "I will." The sun went the rest of the way down behind the western ridge. From somewhere very far away on the eastern ridge, a single wolf began to howl, a young voice, a hunting call, and the keep's wolves answered him, and the wolves of the lower city answered the keep's wolves, and the answering ran out across the kingdom in a long, rolling wave, the way the bow of the assembled packs had run, 7 years before, in the great hall. And Milas, who had walked into a snowstorm with 2 unborn children and a frozen heart and a promise she had meant to keep forever, watched the stars come out over a valley full of wolves singing for her, and she thought that she had been wrong about exactly one thing, that night in the snow. She had not been alone. She had only been early. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this story stays with you.